The lobby of Vance Holdings was never silent. Phones rang and constant chorus heels tapped across polished marble, and the air always hummed with the weight of billions being made lost or defended. But on this morning, silence fell sharp and sudden the moment a small voice cut through the noise. "Can you read this letter? It's very important." Heads turned. Executives in dark suits paused mid-stride. A receptionist's manicured fingers froze above her keyboard. And Aurora Vance, 40 years old, the most powerful woman in the building, perhaps in the city, found herself staring at a child standing just a few feet away. She was tiny, no more than 7 years old, her hair tangled from the wind outside her sneakers scuffed as though they'd run too far. In her trembling hand she held out an envelope, edges browned as if singed by fire. The handwriting on it was uneven, each letter heavy, almost carved into the paper with the desperation of a child pressing too hard. Aurora blinked, stunned not by the presence of a child in her corporate stronghold that happened from time to time, courtesy of harried assistants or board members who didn't have a babysitter, but by the words that came next. "My dad saved you," the little girl whispered. "You just don't remember." The room seemed to tilt. Aurora, known for slicing billion-dollar negotiations into compliance with nothing more than a raised eyebrow, suddenly couldn't find her voice. She reached out and took the envelope before she even realized her hand had moved. It was warm, faintly smoky, like something pulled out of a fire long ago. "What's your name?" Aurora finally asked. Her voice, usually cold steel, sounded strangely thin. Ellie, the girl said, her chin lifted with courage too big for her small frame. "And you're my mom." Gasps rippled through the lobby. Someone dropped a briefcase. Papers fluttered like startled birds. Aurora's throat tightened as though invisible hands were around it. She glanced at the letter again, trying to process, trying to breathe. The handwriting inside wasn't corporate or formal. It was the unmistakable scrawl of a child just learning how to spell. "Dear Miss Vance, my name is Ellie. I think you are my mommy. Daddy said one day I should be brave and find you. Daddy saved you when your car was on fire. He carried me too. You don't know, but I am yours. Please don't be mad. Love, Ellie." Aurora's knees threatened to give. She gripped the envelope so tightly her knuckles whitened. A laugh, brittle and wrong, bubbled up her throat before dying there. Surely this was madness. Some hoax, some manipulative ploy. But as her eyes scanned the uneven words again, something inside her cracked. Because along with the letter tucked carefully in the envelope was a small crayon drawing. It was crude, as all children's drawings are. A stick-figure man smoke curling around him, a baby bundled in his arms. Flames rose from a jagged shape that must have been a car. And beside him, a tall figure, a woman, stood blurred, unfinished, as if the artist wasn't quite sure how to draw her. Aurora's breath caught. The image twisted inside her chest like a key she didn't know she had lost. Ellie's wide eyes searched her face. "You don't remember, Daddy said maybe you forgot. But I know it's you. He told me to find the lady with the mark under her neck." Instinctively, Aurora's hand brushed against the faint birthmark just below her collarbone. She had hated it as a girl, hidden it beneath pearls and scarves. No one outside her family even knew it was there. The silence stretched too long. Ellie's lip trembled. She clutched the hem of her jacket as though bracing for rejection. "I can go," she whispered, "but Daddy said I should try." Aurora couldn't move, couldn't think. All she could feel was the strange heavy weight of the letter in her hand. Smoke, crayon, and those 3 words written in childish script that cut deeper than any boardroom betrayal, "I am yours." A security guard approached awkward, waiting for instructions. Aurora waved him off without looking. For the first time in her carefully engineered life, she had no idea what came next. The marble lobby, the glass towers of New York beyond the revolving doors, all of it blurred as though the world itself was holding its breath. Aurora Vance, woman of iron, whose face graced magazines and whose name made competitors shiver, stood frozen, undone by a child with tangled hair and a letter with burned edges. And when Ellie reached into her pocket and pulled out a necklace half a charm shaped like a heart jagged on one side as if meant to fit into another, Aurora's fingers began to shake. The letter slipped from her grasp. The last line, smudged but still legible, stared back up at her from the marble floor. "Please, Mommy, don't forget me again." Aurora stood there, her entire empire collapsing into silence as if the walls themselves waited for her answer. The memory came back to her in fragments like glass pieces scattered across the floor. Aurora hadn't asked for them, hadn't wanted them, but once the letter was in her hand, the edges cut deep. 7 years earlier, on a night she never spoke of, she had walked away from everything. Back then, Aurora Vance wasn't the untouchable CEO whose name sent stock markets trembling. She was simply a daughter trapped inside a golden cage. The heir of the Vance fortune paraded like a prize at charity galas promised to men she didn't love. On that night, she could no longer breathe. She had slipped out of the Lancaster Hotel ballroom, the diamonds on her dress glittering like shackles under the lights. The limo driver had waited at the curb, but Aurora didn't go to the car. Instead, she walked, past doormen who didn't dare stop her, past sidewalks glistening from a fresh rain, past her own reflection in the glass windows that looked too perfect, too fake. And then she saw it, a neon sign buzzing above a bar by the pier, a place her family would have fainted to know she entered. Harbor's End, the sign said, the kind of place that smelled of salt and spilled whiskey where no one cared about last names. That was where she saw him. Callan Brooks. He didn't look like anyone who belonged in her world. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hands still marked by grease from a day's work. His eyes, tired, shadowed, carried the weight of something he hadn't spoken about. He sat alone, a half-empty glass in front of him, staring at nothing as if the world outside had already forgotten him. Aurora had taken the stool next to his without asking. He hadn't looked up right away. When he did, she expected the recognition, the polite deference she always received. But his gaze was steady, unstartled almost, uninterested. "What are you running from?" he had asked. No introduction, no pretense. She laughed, sharp, bitter. "How do you know I'm running?" He shrugged. "Because I am too." It was the first honest conversation she'd had in months, maybe years. They didn't exchange last names. She didn't tell him about the fiancé her father had chosen, or the suffocating weight of empire. He didn't tell her about the mother he'd just buried, or how he'd walked away from a career that promised success but stole his soul. Instead, they spoke of simpler things, of sunsets over the ocean, of what freedom might feel like, of the ache of wanting to be seen for who you truly are. One drink became two. Two became three. And somewhere between the laughter and the silence, the distance between them disappeared. Later that night, in a room that smelled faintly of sea air and old wood, Aurora felt something she hadn't known. She was starving for the warmth of being held without expectation. For a few hours, she wasn't Aurora Vance, heiress to a ruthless dynasty. She was just a woman, broken and fragile, clinging to someone who understood what it meant to be lost. They didn't talk about tomorrow. When dawn bled through the blinds, she rose quietly, dressing in silence, her heart pounding with the weight of choices she couldn't yet name. He stirred half asleep, but didn't ask her to stay. Perhaps he knew she wouldn't. Perhaps he was afraid to. By the time the sun was high, Aurora was gone. She never asked for his name. He never asked for hers. A week later, the nausea came, the late period. The undeniable truth that changed everything. Aurora was pregnant. The revelation was a storm. In the halls of her family estate, her father's voice thundered like judgment itself. "You will end this. Do you understand? You will not shame this family with your recklessness." But Aurora, for once in her life, refused to bend. No. Her voice had been small, shaking, but it was hers. "She's mine. I won't destroy her." Her family's fury was swift, merciless. They locked her away behind doctor's visits and whispered threats. When threats failed, they offered money exile, even comfort if she complied. She didn't. One night, clutching the swell of her belly and the life inside it, Aurora left. She abandoned the mansion, the credit cards, the bodyguards, the suffocating weight of legacy. She chose a cheap apartment with flickering lights, hand-me-down furniture, and loneliness. But it was hers. She was determined to raise her child no matter the cost. And yet, fate is cruel. On Hazel Ridge Road, just weeks after giving birth, Aurora's car spun out on black ice. Flames roared up the hood. She remembered screaming not for herself, but for the tiny bundle in the back seat. And then he came. A man with no reason to save her, no promise to keep. He broke the glass, pulled her free, carried her baby against his chest like something sacred. His arms were strong, his voice steady, though the fire burned so close. Aurora never saw his face clearly. Smoke clouded everything. But in that moment, as she coughed against his shoulder and reached for her baby, something in her heart whispered that she had met him before. And then darkness. When she woke in the hospital, her family was there. Cold, controlling. The baby was gone. They told her it was better this way. They told her to forget. But she couldn't. She never knew the man's name. She never knew where her daughter went. Until today. Until a letter with burned edges and a child's drawing reopened the door she had thought forever sealed. Aurora's fingers trembled as the memory completed itself. The lobby around her blurred. The child Ellie stood watching her with eyes too familiar, too haunting. And for the first time in years, Aurora Vance felt her carefully built empire crack piece by piece under the weight of one truth she could no longer deny. The night she had tried to forget had found her again. The storm that night wasn't just in the sky, it was in her chest, in the wheels beneath her car, in the fragile hope she clung to as she drove down Hazel Ridge Road. Aurora Vance had never been so tired. The baby cried in the back seat, her tiny voice piercing the dark like a desperate plea. Aurora whispered through clenched teeth, trying to soothe her daughter while gripping the steering wheel with knuckles white. "Shh, sweetheart. Mommy's here. Mommy's not going anywhere." But the truth was, she was already lost. The rain had turned to sleet, and black ice shimmered invisible across the winding road. One wrong movement, one too sharp turn, and the car spun. Aurora's scream mingled with the baby's as headlights from an oncoming truck flared like judgment itself. She yanked the wheel, but it was too late. The world turned upside down. Metal groaned, glass shattered, and then fire. Flames licked across the hood, spreading fast, devouring the night. Aurora tried the door jammed. She turned, reaching back her hands, frantic on the car seat straps. "Hold on, baby, hold on." Smoke burned her throat. Her vision blurred. She coughed until her chest ached, fighting against panic as the fire crept closer. Somewhere inside the heiress who had once been groomed for gala nights and perfect smiles shattered into nothing more than a terrified mother. Her fingers fumbled at the buckle, shaking too much to get it free. "Please," she begged the darkness, "please not like this." And then, through the roar of fire and storm, came the sound of running footsteps. A man. He didn't hesitate. He didn't stop to measure the danger. He tore off his jacket, wrapped it around his arm, and smashed through the glass with a strength that seemed fueled by something more than muscle. The window gave way, shards scattering like diamonds across the wet asphalt. "Take my hand." His voice cut through the chaos, urgent, steady. Aurora's heart lurched. She couldn't see him clearly, just the outline of a man, his face shadowed by smoke eyes burning with determination. "I've got you," he said, reaching in. Somewhere deep inside, a flicker of recognition stirred. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why his presence felt like something already written in her bones. But she placed her hand in his anyway. He pulled her out first, dragging her across the gravel, then turned back without pause. Aurora screamed, trying to rise, but her body refused. The baby, he was already moving. Already there. Smoke poured out of the car as he reached into the flames. his arms wrapped around the tiny bundle, shielding her with his chest as though she were his own. For a breathless moment the fire roared high, threatening to swallow them both. Then he emerged, cradling the infant against his heart, coughing but unyielding. Aurora sobbed, reaching for her daughter as he knelt beside her. The baby was crying alive, whole, untouched by the inferno that had nearly consumed them. "You're safe," he rasped, pressing the child into her arms. His voice broke on the words. Aurora clutched the baby to her chest, shaking. She wanted to ask his name, to say thank you, to tell him she somehow knew him, that their paths had crossed once before. But her lungs refused, her lips parted only to cough until her vision darkened. The last thing she saw was the man's face, half hidden by smoke, his eyes fierce with something she couldn't name. And then blackness. When she woke, the room was white, sterile. Hospital machines hummed softly. For a moment, Aurora thought she had dreamed it all, the fire, the stranger, even the child. Her arms were empty. Then the door opened. Her father. His expression was hard, his suit unwrinkled, as if he'd stepped out of a boardroom instead of a storm. Beside him, a doctor cleared his throat, eyes downcast. The baby Aurora croaked, her voice raw. "Where is she?" Her father's jaw tightened. "Handled," he said. "The child will be cared for." No, Aurora pushed herself upright, her chest burning. "She's mine. Not anymore." His tone was final, cold. "You've embarrassed this family enough. Do you think we'll let you destroy everything for the sake of a mistake?" Tears seared her eyes. "She's not a mistake. She's my daughter." But her father turned his back. "You will recover. You will move on. This never happened." The door shut. Aurora's scream never left her throat. Her body shook, powerless. And though she fought, though she tried to rise and tear down every wall between her and her baby, the drugs in her veins pulled her back into darkness. Outside that room, down the hallway, the man who had saved her stood with his arms wrapped around the baby. He looked out of place, a soot-stained engineer among men in polished shoes. His knuckles were scraped raw from breaking glass, his lungs still ragged from smoke. The family's men in suits surrounded him, voices low and sharp. "You will sign this one of them," said, thrusting a paper toward him. "You will disappear. You will never claim her, never approach her, never contact her again. In exchange, we'll cover every hospital bill, every debt. Walk away." The man's eyes fell to the baby, her tiny fist curling around his thumb. His chest ached with a pain deeper than smoke, but he knew power when he saw it. He knew this family could crush him, could take the child and bury her fate in a system that would forget her name. His jaw tightened. He signed. But he didn't walk away empty, because as he left that hospital cradling the baby, the world had tried to erase, he whispered into the night, "You'll never be forgotten. I'll make sure of it." And from that night forward, Callan Brooks became more than a man who had lost everything. He became a father. The paper was still damp when the ink dried. Callan Brooks stood in the sterile hallway of the hospital, the pen heavy in his hand, his signature bleeding into the page like a wound he couldn't close. He had signed away his rights, at least on paper, but in his chest, where the smoke still burned, he knew no contract could erase the truth he felt when he looked at the child in his arms. Her tiny face was pressed against his shirt, smudged with soot and ash, but her breath was steady. Her little heart beat against his ribs as if it had always belonged there. "You're safe," he whispered, though his own voice broke. "As long as I'm here, you're safe." The men in suits had dispersed their threats and promises, echoing like shadows in the empty corridor. They thought the matter was finished, that money and power had buried another secret. But Callan wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. He named her Ellie. It wasn't the name written on the birth papers, those were locked away by people who wanted her forgotten. But to him, she was Ellie from the first moment he looked into her eyes. The first weeks were chaos. He didn't know how to warm a bottle properly, how to quiet a baby's cries in the middle of the night, how to juggle work while holding a life so fragile. He was a 30-year-old engineer with grease under his fingernails, not a man prepared to raise a child alone. But grief had already hollowed him. He had buried his mother just weeks before. Now, holding Ellie, he found himself clinging to the one reason not to give up. He rented a tiny apartment far from the city, far from the reach of the Vance family. The place was cramped, the wallpaper peeling the heater, temperamental. But the first time Ellie laughed, really laughed, when he made a silly face while balancing her bottle on his forehead, he knew it was home. Years passed, marked not by promotions or pay raises, but by milestones only a parent counts. Her first steps, wobbly and determined across a living room floor littered with makeshift toys. Her first words mumbled in the dark as she clutched his finger and whispered, "Dada." The nights when he read her the same book 3 times, his voice hoarse but his heart full, just to see her fall asleep with a smile. Callan traded career ambition for stability. He picked up contract jobs, small engineering gigs that paid the bills, and when work dried up he took shifts fixing engines or repairing leaky pipes. His resume faded, but his love for Ellie only deepened. Still, there were nights, quiet, heavy nights when the weight of what he'd lost pressed down on him. He'd sit at the table, the one he'd built himself from scrap wood, staring at the half of a necklace he had kept all these years. The jagged heart pendant glinted faintly under the lamp, waiting for the piece that would make it whole. "Your mom," he whispered, looking at Ellie asleep in her bed. "She's out there. One day, if you're brave enough, you'll find her." It wasn't a bitter promise. It was hope, the only kind he could give her. Ellie grew up knowing the truth, or at least the pieces Callan could offer. She knew her mother wasn't gone, just lost. She knew her father had saved her from fire, from fate, from abandonment. And though she sometimes asked questions he couldn't answer. What's her favorite color? Does she like pancakes? Does she miss me? He never lied. I don't know, he'd admit gently, but I know she's a part of you, and that part is beautiful. Ellie would nod her curls, bouncing her faith in him unshaken. But for Callan, the quiet sacrifices piled high. His friends drifted away, building families of their own, while he poured everything into one little girl. His health began to falter, too many skipped meals, too many long nights on jobs that broke his body. Yet he never let Ellie see his weakness. When she wanted to join a school play, he stayed up late sewing her costume from old fabric scraps. When she wished for a birthday cake shaped like a castle, he worked extra shifts and spent the night before carving it from sponge cake, messy but full of love. And when she once told him with the wisdom of a child far too young, "Daddy, I don't need toys. I just need you," he had to excuse himself to the bathroom to cry where she couldn't see. Because what she didn't know, what he never told her, was that his heart wasn't as strong as it used to be. The smoke from Hazel Ridge Road hadn't just scarred his lungs. It had weakened something deeper. The doctors warned him years later his heart would tire before its time, but he refused to let that shadow touch her life. On Ellie's 7th birthday, after the candles were blown out and the small apartment filled with laughter, Callan found himself watching her carefully. She was radiant, her eyes alive with joy as she showed off the crooked paper crown she'd made. He pressed a hand against his chest, the ache sharper than before. He had promised her safety, promised her love, promised she would never be forgotten. But how long could he keep that promise if his body was failing him? That night, after Ellie fell asleep with frosting still on her chin, Callan opened the drawer of his nightstand. Inside were 2 things he had kept hidden: a letter he had written in his rough handwriting, and the other half of the heart-shaped necklace, the twin to the one Aurora had worn 7 years ago. He stared at them for a long time, the silence of the apartment pressing in. Then he whispered aloud, more to himself than anyone else. "When the time comes, she'll need to know. She'll need her mother." It was a promise he never wanted to break, and though Ellie didn't know it yet, that promise was about to change everything. Ellie was sharper than most kids her age. Callan had always known that. She noticed things, small things, like how he sometimes sat down too quickly, or how he rubbed his chest when he thought she wasn't looking. But children only ask so many times before they start piecing answers together themselves. It was late autumn when she found the first clue. Callan had been out in the shed tinkering with an old lawnmower he was fixing for a neighbor. When Ellie ran in to call him for dinner, she saw the pill bottle half hidden behind his toolbox. The word on the label looked strange heavy. Medoprolol. Ellie couldn't pronounce it, but she knew medicine when she saw it. That night she tiptoed out of bed holding the bottle in her small hands and padded into the living room. Her father was there sitting at the table with a mug of tea, his shoulders slumped in a way that made him look older than he was. "Daddy," she said softly, holding up the bottle, "why do you take this?" Callan froze. He hadn't planned on telling her. Not yet. He looked into her wide eyes that carried both innocence and a fierce determination, and he realized he couldn't lie. He sighed, taking the bottle gently from her hand. "It's for my heart, Ellie." "Your heart?" Her voice cracked almost a whisper. "It's tired," he admitted, leaning back in his chair. "It doesn't work as well as it used to. Some days are fine. Some days—" He trailed off, choosing his words carefully. "Some days it feels like I've run too far, even when I haven't moved at all." Ellie's throat tightened. "Are you going to die?" The question shattered him. Callan reached across the table, taking her small hands in his. His palms were calloused rough from years of work, but his grip was steady. "Not today. Not tomorrow. But, sweetheart." He swallowed, his voice raw. "One day, I might not be here, and I want to make sure you're not alone when that day comes." Her lip trembled. Tears welled, but she fought them back. "I don't need anyone else," she whispered. "I just need you." Callan closed his eyes. He wanted to believe that was enough, but he knew it wasn't fair. Not to her. "Ellie," he said softly, reaching into the drawer beside him. He pulled out an envelope creased from being handled too many times and a small jewelry box. He slid them across the table toward her. "What's this?" she asked, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "A letter," he said, tapping the envelope. "And a necklace." He opened the box, revealing a delicate silver chain with a jagged heart-shaped pendant, the missing twin to the charm Aurora had once worn. Ellie leaned closer, eyes wide. "It's broken." "It's half of something whole," Callan explained. His voice trembled, but he forced himself to continue. "There's a woman out there, Ellie. She has the other half. She has a mark just here." He touched just below his collarbone the place where Aurora's birthmark lived. "And when you find her, you'll know. Because she's your mother." Ellie blinked, the world tilting under her. My mother." Callan nodded slowly. "The night you were born, she almost lost everything. I saved you both. But her family, they didn't let her stay. They made sure she couldn't be part of your life. I swore I'd protect you. And I did. But now—" He looked down, his hand pressing against his chest. "I can't promise how much longer I can fight." Ellie's heart hammered. She wanted to scream, to cry, to beg him not to talk like that. But instead she straightened in her chair, her small frame suddenly fierce with resolve. "Then I'll find her. I'll find her for you. For us." Callan's throat closed. His little girl braver than he had ever been. He reached out, cupping her cheek. "One day, if you're brave enough, you'll find her. I always believed that. I didn't think that day would come so soon." The next morning, Ellie tucked the letter into her backpack. The necklace hung heavy around her neck, the jagged heart cool against her skin. She kissed her father's cheek before school, lingering longer than usual, memorizing the warmth of his stubble, the tired smile he always gave her. Callan watched her go, leaning against the doorframe, his chest aching, not just from his failing heart but from the weight of what he had asked of her. When the bus pulled away, he whispered into the autumn air, "Please God, let her be strong enough. Let her find the one person who can love her when I can't anymore." And in the silence that followed, only the wind answered. That night, while Callan slept fitfully in his chair, Ellie sat at her desk under the dim glow of a lamp. She spread the letter out before her. The handwriting was clumsy, the words uneven because her father had written it as if it came from her. My name is Ellie. I think you are my mommy. Daddy said one day I should be brave and find you. Daddy saved you when your car was on fire. He carried me too. You don't know, but I am yours. Her small hand traced each line. She imagined the woman who might read it. A woman with the same eyes. A woman who might finally fill the emptiness she had always pretended not to feel. Ellie folded the letter, carefully kissed the edge of the envelope, and whispered, I'll find you. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of her father's promise resting on her shoulders. And she was ready to carry it. Aurora Vance had been handed 1,000 letters in her life contracts, proposals, confessions, written by men who thought fortune was the same as love. She had read them all with the detached efficiency of a woman who didn't believe in words anymore. But this letter was different. She sat in her office late into the night, the city stretched out like a galaxy beyond the glass walls. The letter lay in front of her on the desk edges, browned, smelling faintly of smoke, the handwriting uneven and innocent. She read it once, then again, and again. Each time the words carved deeper. My name is Ellie. I think you are my mommy. Her chest tightened. She pushed the paper aside, stood and paced the office as though movement might shake off the weight pressing in. She told herself it was impossible. A prank. Some cruel ploy. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking. On the desk beside the letter was the necklace the child had shown her earlier. Half a heart, jagged on one side. Aurora opened the bottom drawer of her desk, one she hadn't touched in years. Inside, hidden in a velvet pouch, was the other half, its twin. She had kept it all this time, though she had tried to forget why. She held it now, the metal cold, her reflection warped in its shine. The pieces matched. Perfectly. Her knees weakened. She sat back down, the city lights spinning outside her window. On top of the letter lay a crayon drawing. The child's art was messy but unmistakable, a man carrying a baby out of a car engulfed in flames. Aurora's lungs seized, because she remembered. The fire, Hazel Ridge Road, the arms that pulled her free, the voice that said, I've got you. And in that memory, though blurred by smoke and fear, something stirred recognition. Not a stranger, not fully, but a man whose presence she had felt before, a man she had once held if only for a single night. Her throat burned. She pressed the drawing to her chest and let out a sound she hadn't made in years, a broken sob. Aurora Vance did not cry. She built walls so high no one could reach her. But tonight, those walls crumbled. Because if the letter was true, if this child was hers, then all the years of emptiness had been more than loneliness. They had been loss. She wiped her face and forced herself to breathe. She was Aurora Vance. She didn't crumble. She acted. Find him, she whispered to the empty office. Her assistant hesitated the next morning when Aurora handed her the letter. Ma'am. With respect, this could be fabricated. Children, find him. Aurora repeated, her tone sharper now. I don't care what it takes. I want to know where this girl came from, who raised her everything. Within hours, the search began. And by evening, Aurora sat in her car, the necklace heavy in her pocket as she stared at an address scrawled on a slip of paper. A modest house on the outskirts of town. Faded paint, a sagging porch. A place far removed from glass towers and penthouses. She hesitated at the curb, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. What if she was wrong? What if this was all some cruel mistake? But then the door opened, and Ellie ran out her backpack, bouncing her laughter bright. Aurora's breath caught. She had never seen herself in another face so clearly. The same tilt of the chin, the same wide eyes. It was like looking into a mirror from another lifetime. A man followed her out. Aurora froze. He was thinner now, his shoulders bowed, his movements careful as though weighed down by more than age. But she knew him. Not from society columns or corporate battles, but from the memory of firelight and a night long ago when she had fled her world and found refuge in his arms. Callan Brooks, the man from Hazel Ridge Road, the man from that one forgotten night. Her breath hitched. She pressed her fingers to her lips, fighting to steady herself. Ellie turned and saw her. The little girl froze, then lit up with a smile that made Aurora's chest ache. "You came." Aurora stumbled out of the car, her legs unsteady. She looked at Callan, her voice barely audible. "It was you." He didn't answer. He just stood there on the porch watching her with eyes that carried 7 years of silence, sacrifice, and secrets. And when she reached into her pocket and held out the necklace, the other half, his gaze fell to it and his shoulders trembled. For a moment, the world was utterly still. Then Callan turned and disappeared inside the house. Aurora stood frozen on the porch, Ellie tugging at her hand. The letter, the necklace, the drawing, all of it had led her here. And though her heart already knew the truth, Aurora realized she needed one more answer. Science could confirm what her soul already whispered. Tomorrow there would be a test. Aurora Vance had faced senators, billionaires, and boards full of men who lived to break her resolve. But nothing, not mergers, not betrayals, not the weight of an empire, had ever made her chest tighten like the sight of Callan Brooks standing in the doorway of that small, weathered house. He wasn't the man she remembered from 7 years ago. He was more. Time had carved lines into his face, shadows beneath his eyes, a fragility in the way he held himself. Yet there was something unshaken, too, a quiet strength, a dignity she had almost forgotten existed in men. And then there was Ellie bouncing on her toes beside him, her backpack sliding off one shoulder, looking at the two of them like she had just solved the biggest mystery in the world. "Daddy," she said, her smile wide and fearless, "she's real." The words hit Aurora harder than any accusation, harder than the letter she had read a dozen times. She's real. To Ellie, Aurora wasn't a CEO, wasn't untouchable. She was simply the missing piece of a family. Aurora felt her throat tighten. She took a step forward, then another, her heels crunching on the gravel. "Ellie," she whispered, her voice breaking. Callan's hand landed gently on the girl's shoulder. "Go inside, sweetheart." But Ellie protested, looking between them. "It's all right," Callan said softly, his eyes never leaving Aurora. "Just for a minute." The little girl hesitated, then obeyed, slipping inside with one last curious glance. The screen door clicked shut. Silence stretched between them, heavy as storm clouds. Aurora's gaze dropped to the pendant in her hand, its jagged edge gleaming faintly. Slowly, she held it up. "This belongs with yours." Callan's jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the other half, worn from years of being held. Without a word, he placed it in her palm, letting the pieces rest together. The halves fit perfectly, two fragments that had always been meant to make one whole. Aurora's chest ached. "It was you," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "That night, Hazel Ridge Road. You pulled me out. You saved her." His eyes flickered, but his tone remained measured. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," she said sharply. "Not anyone. You." Callan looked away, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of 7 years pressed down on them all at once. "It doesn't matter now. You have your life. I have mine." Aurora shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. "You don't understand. I thought I lost her. They told me." Her voice cracked. She pressed a hand to her mouth, swallowing the sob that rose. "I thought she was gone." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Pain. Anger. Maybe both. "They made sure of that," he said quietly. "Your family. Your world. They handed me papers, threatened me, told me to disappear. I signed them because I thought it was the only way to keep her safe." Aurora staggered back, her chest heaving. She had always suspected her family had buried truths, but hearing it spoken aloud felt like standing on shattering glass. "You raised her," she whispered. All these years. Callan's gaze softened then, and for a moment the hardness faded. She's my whole world. Every morning, every night. I didn't have much, but I gave her what I could. She's strong because of it. She's brave. He paused, his voice trembling. She's everything I never knew I needed. Aurora's knees nearly buckled. The truth wrapped around her heart, raw and undeniable. He hadn't just saved Ellie, he had built her life from ashes alone, carrying a burden that should never have been his to bear. I need to know, Aurora said, forcing her voice steady. I need to know the truth, Callan. Not just what you believe. What is? He studied her for a long time, his eyes searching hers as though weighing her soul. Then without a word he disappeared inside the house. Aurora's heart pounded as she waited, the porch light humming faintly above her. When the door creaked open again, Callan stepped out with an envelope. He handed it to her without meeting her eyes. Inside was Ellie's drawing of the fire, creased, smudged from little hands, and with it a folded sheet of paper, the results of an old hospital test proving Ellie's birth date, her blood type, everything that aligned with Aurora's memory. Aurora's breath caught. But it wasn't enough. We'll do a DNA test, she said firmly, her CEO's steel rising even through the storm of her emotions. I need proof, and so do you. Callan didn't argue. He only nodded once, then turned back toward the doorway. For a moment, she thought he would close it behind him forever. But then Ellie appeared again, sleepy-eyed, clutching a stuffed bear. She blinked at Aurora, then smiled, simple and sure. And in that small, innocent smile, Aurora felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Hospitals had always unsettled Aurora. They reminded her of cold corridors, whispered threats, and the night she woke to find her daughter gone. But this time she wasn't here for board meetings or philanthropy announcements. She was here for truth. The waiting room was too bright, its walls painted in pastels that tried too hard to soften the reality. Aurora sat in the corner, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across from her, Callan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as though it might offer answers faster than any lab. Between them sat Ellie, swinging her legs nervously, the necklace with the jagged pendant glinting against her sweater. She clutched her stuffed bear in one hand, her gaze darting between the two adults who had suddenly become the gravity of her world. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging on Callan's sleeve. "Are you scared?" He looked up, startled. His tired eyes softened and he managed a faint smile. "A little, yeah." "Me too," she said. Then she turned toward Aurora. "Are you scared?" Aurora inhaled sharply. The girl's eyes, her eyes searched hers with such disarming honesty that Aurora couldn't hide. Yes, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been this scared." Ellie nodded solemnly as though she understood more than her years should allow. "Then we're all brave together." The nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Results are ready. Dr. Patel will see you now." Aurora rose too quickly, her knees trembling. Callan stood slower, as if bracing himself against the weight of 7 years pressing down at once. Ellie squeezed both their hands as they walked into the office. Dr. Patel greeted them kindly, though his professional composure never slipped. He gestured toward the chairs. "Please sit." Aurora's pulse pounded in her ears. She wanted to demand the result immediately, to rip the bandage off. But she forced herself to breathe, to appear steady, though inside her chest was chaos. The doctor opened the folder. The DNA test confirms parentage. He glanced up, his eyes softening. Aurora Vance, Callan Brooks. Ellie is biologically your daughter. Probability 99.98%. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Aurora pressed a hand to her mouth, a sob breaking loose despite her control. Tears blurred her vision, spilling before she could stop them. She turned to Ellie, who looked up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. "It's true," Aurora whispered, her voice trembling. "You're mine. You've always been mine." Ellie blinked, her lip trembling. Then she smiled a smile so pure it lit the sterile room. She threw her arms around Aurora's waist, clinging tight. "I knew it," she murmured. "I knew you were real." Aurora buried her face in the child's hair, inhaling the scent of crayons and shampoo, her heart splitting open. Years of silence, of believing she had been robbed forever, melted into this one embrace. Across the desk, Callan sat frozen, his eyes glistening, though he tried to blink the tears away. He had promised himself he wouldn't break here, not in front of them. But as Aurora held their daughter, something inside him gave way. "You never stopped protecting her," Aurora said, suddenly lifting her gaze to him. Her voice cracked but carried steel beneath it. "Or me." Callan's hands clenched. He swallowed hard, then shook his head. "I didn't save you. You saved me. Both of you." The words hung in the room heavy and raw. Later, they stepped outside into the cool evening. The sun was setting, painting streaks of gold and rose across the sky. Ellie skipped ahead, humming to herself, the necklace bouncing with each step. Aurora walked beside Callan in silence. Every part of her wanted to say more, to apologize for years stolen to rage at the injustice, to confess the guilt that had haunted her every night since Hazel Ridge Road. But the words tangled. Finally, she stopped. "I can't change what happened," she said, her voice unsteady, "but I can be here now. For her. For you." Callan looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. Ellie turned, running back to grab their hands. She placed one of Aurora's hands in Callan's, her own small fingers wrapping around both. "Now we're really together," she said with certainty. Aurora's throat tightened. Callan didn't pull away. For the first time in 7 years, Aurora Vance allowed herself to believe in something she had buried long ago, the possibility of family. And though science had confirmed what her heart already knew, it was Ellie, the brave little girl with burned letters and crayon drawings, who had brought them all home. Aurora Vance had conquered markets, outmaneuvered rivals, and built empires from the ashes of failure. Yet nothing in her meticulously planned life had prepared her for the role she found herself in, now walking down the corridor of a hospital, not as a CEO, but as a mother. Beside her, Callan's steps were slow, careful. His hand brushed the wall once for balance, and Aurora's chest clenched at the sight. She had seen him in her memories as the man who charged into fire, unbreakable and strong. Now she saw the toll those years had taken. His breaths were shallow, his shoulders narrower than she remembered. Ellie skipped ahead, humming a tune only she seemed to know. Her little hands carried the paperwork the nurse had given them, though it was mostly just scribbles and appointment slips. She turned and grinned, proud of her task. "I'm helping Aurora," smiled through the ache in her throat. "Yes, sweetheart, you're helping more than you know." Callan's eyes softened at the sound of Aurora's voice using that word, sweetheart. He said nothing, but the flicker of gratitude in his gaze was enough. In the weeks that followed, Aurora moved quickly, as she always did when faced with a crisis. Except this time, the crisis wasn't a hostile takeover or a lawsuit, it was Callan Brooks. She arranged specialists. She pulled strings at the city's most exclusive clinic. When the first bills arrived, she tore them in half without even looking. Money had never meant less. One evening, after another round of tests, Callan sat on the edge of a hospital bed, his shirt open, the heart monitor beeping softly beside him. He looked up as Aurora entered, holding Ellie's backpack. "You didn't have to do all this," he murmured. "Yes," she answered simply, setting the bag down. "I did." Callan searched her face, trying to find the catch, the fine print. But all he saw was a woman who had once been broken, now fighting to stitch the pieces back together. Ellie hopped onto the bed beside him, careful not to disturb the wires. "Daddy Mommy says they'll make you stronger." Callan's lips twitched. "Mommy, huh?" Aurora froze, her breath catching. Ellie nodded, completely certain. "That's who she is. I knew it when she hugged me." Aurora's heart cracked open at the words. She looked at Callan, who didn't correct the girl. He only lowered his head, blinking hard. It wasn't just hospitals and tests. Aurora began inviting them into her world. She didn't do it with press releases or boardroom spectacles. She did it quietly. A dinner at her penthouse. A walk in the park where no photographers could see. At first, Callan resisted. He wasn't built for chandeliers and champagne. He preferred the hum of an engine, the scrape of tools, the kind of work that left hands raw, but hearts steady. But then Ellie tugged his hand as they walked past Aurora's office one afternoon. She pointed to the drafting table where Aurora had laid out plans for a new community project. "Daddy, you could help her," Ellie said. "You're good with building stuff. You always fix everything." Aurora hesitated, then smiled faintly. "She's right. I could use a technical advisor. Just temporary. Flexible hours." Callan looked between them, his chest tight. For years he had kept Ellie's world small to protect her. Now she was pulling it wider, thread by thread. "All right," he said finally, his voice low. "I'll help." Days turned into weeks. Slowly, the walls between them thinned. Aurora found herself lingering in the workshop space Callan set up in one of her company's unused labs. He sketched designs with surprising precision, his hands steady even when his body faltered. He spoke with quiet clarity, never boasting, never demanding. And each time he looked up and found her watching him, Aurora felt something stir inside her chest, a warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. One evening, after Ellie had fallen asleep in the corner of the lab, Aurora approached his desk. "You could have been so much more," she said softly, glancing at the blueprints spread before him. "You sacrificed everything." Callan leaned back, eyes shadowed but steady. "I became a father. That was more." Aurora's throat tightened. She turned away before he could see the tears that threatened. The real shift came one quiet night at home. Ellie sat between them at Aurora's kitchen table drawing pictures of stick figures with big, smiling faces. She held one up proudly. "This is us," she said. "Daddy, Mommy, and me." Aurora froze. Callan looked at the paper, then at Aurora. Ellie tilted her head, serious now. "Are you going to marry Mommy?" The room went still. Aurora's heart raced. Callan's breath caught. Ellie looked between them, her expression innocent but insistent. "Because we should all be together. For real." Aurora reached across the table, brushing Ellie's curls from her face. Her voice was gentle but firm. "One day at a time, darling." Callan met Aurora's eyes over their daughter's head. And in that look, unspoken but undeniable, something passed between them, an understanding that, though the past was heavy, the future was theirs to shape. Later that night, Aurora stood by the window of her penthouse watching the city lights glitter like stars. Behind her, Callan stirred his voice quiet. "She brought us back," he said. Aurora turned. He was leaning against the doorframe, weary but alive, his gaze soft. "Yes," she whispered, her heart swelling as she thought of Ellie's bravery, her letter, her necklace, her smile. She didn't just bring the letter, she brought us home. And for the first time in years, Aurora Vance let herself hope not just for survival, but for love. The Vance family estate had always stood like a fortress, marble pillars, sprawling lawns, and a history carved into every stone. But tonight, as Aurora walked up those steps with Callan at her side and Ellie clutching her hand, it felt less like homecoming and more like a battlefield. Inside, the air was cold despite the roaring fireplace. Her father sat in the leather chair he had ruled from for decades, his gaze as sharp as ever. Her mother, poised and silent, occupied the seat beside him. A handful of board members had been invited, too cloaked in tailored suits and false politeness. Aurora felt Ellie squeeze her fingers. She bent down and whispered, "It's all right, darling. Just stay close." Callan stood a step behind them, wearing a suit that had clearly been borrowed, its sleeves a little too long, but his presence, quiet, unshaken, filled the room with more gravity than all the men in ties. Her father's eyes narrowed. "So, it's true. You've dragged the past back into this house." Aurora straightened her chin high. "The past never left, Father. You buried it, but it found me anyway." One of the board members cleared his throat. "Aurora, this isn't wise. Your reputation, the company." She cut him off. "My reputation, my company, those mean nothing if I have to deny who I am to keep them." Ellie looked up at her pride shining in her little face. Her father's voice thundered. That man he jabbed a finger toward Callan was paid to disappear. He has no place here. Neither does that child. Aurora's heart hammered, but her voice was steady. "That child is mine. Ours. And you will never erase her again." The room fell into stunned silence. Aurora had spoken in boardrooms across continents, but never with such raw conviction. For once, she wasn't defending profit margins, she was defending her family. Callan stepped forward, then his voice low but resonant. "I don't have money. I don't have power. All I had was a promise, that I would keep her safe. And I did. For 7 years, I carried what you tried to throw away." Every word landed like a hammer. Even the board members shifted uncomfortable in their chairs. Aurora turned to them, her eyes blazing. "If wealth means forgetting who I am, if power means silencing the truth, then I don't need it. I'd rather lose every dollar than lose them." Her father's face darkened, veins rising on his temple. But Aurora didn't flinch. She wasn't the trembling girl they had once controlled. She was a mother now. A woman rebuilt by fire and love. She took Ellie's hand, then Callan's. Together they stood before the empire that had tried to destroy them. "I am starting something new," Aurora announced, her voice echoing against the vaulted ceilings. "A scholarship fund, for children like Ellie, for fathers like Callan, for every forgotten soul who deserves a chance. It will be called Hazel Ridge Hope, and I will fund it myself." Gasps rippled through the room. The board members whispered, scandalized. But Callan's gaze never left her. He saw not the CEO, not the heiress, but the woman who had chosen love over legacy. Ellie tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, say something." Callan swallowed hard, the weight of years pressing against his chest. He stepped forward, his voice rough but sure. "I didn't save them," he said, his eyes glistening as he looked at Aurora, then Ellie. "They saved me." For a long moment, silence hung thick in the room. Even the fire seemed to hush. Then Ellie, unable to contain herself, clapped her little hands together. "See, we're stronger than fire." The room broke not into applause, not into chaos, but into something deeper. The fortress walls of the Vance family cracked not from external force, but from truth. Aurora squeezed Callan's hand. The fire hadn't won. Love had. 1 year later. The world had not stopped turning, but for Aurora Vance it had shifted on its axis. The towering glass walls of boardrooms still stood, the hum of markets still drummed on, but her life was no longer measured in quarterly earnings. It was measured in mornings, in laughter, in a little girl's footsteps echoing across a wooden porch. The house by the lake wasn't grand. Its siding was sun-faded. Its roof sometimes leaked when the rain came heavy, and the swing set in the backyard creaked like it carried a century of secrets. But to Aurora, Callan, and Ellie, it was everything. Aurora knelt in the grass that morning, tying back her hair as Ellie dashed across the yard with a ribbon trailing behind her. "Higher, Mommy," the little girl cried as she pumped her legs on the swing. Callan stood nearby, a tool belt around his waist, tightening bolts on the swing's old frame. He glanced over his shoulder, smirking. "You're going to launch her into orbit if she goes any higher." Aurora laughed, her voice light freer than it had been in years. Better orbit than another board meeting. Ellie squealed with delight as the swing soared. Her curls bounced her necklace, glinting in the sun, the jagged pendant, now whole, reunited with the missing half Aurora, wore around her neck. Later that afternoon, the three of them sat by the lake, skipping stones. The water shimmered in the light, reflecting a sky so blue it seemed to bless the moment itself. Ellie leaned against Callan, her tiny hand slipping into his. "Daddy," she asked softly. "Yeah, kiddo. Are you happy?" Callan swallowed his gaze, drifting to Aurora, who was watching him from a few feet away. Her hair caught the wind, her smile unguarded. He turned back to Ellie, his chest tightening. "Happier than I ever thought I could be." Ellie's eyes flickered to Aurora. "Mommy, are you happy?" Aurora's throat tightened. She walked closer, knelt beside them, and cupped her daughter's face. "More than I ever knew I could be," she whispered. Ellie beamed, and in that smile, Aurora saw redemption. She saw the fire that had once nearly destroyed her transformed now into the flame of love that bound them together. That evening, friends gathered in the backyard under strings of lights. Neighbors brought food, laughter floated across the grass, and the air buzzed with the sweetness of community. It wasn't a gala. It wasn't staged for cameras. It was real. Aurora wore a simple white dress, not couture, not silk, spun in Paris, but the same dress she had worn the night she left her family's mansion for good. A dress that symbolized freedom, a second chance. Callan, in a suit, pressed carefully by Ellie's little hands, that morning stood tall, his rugged features softened by the joy in his eyes. As Ellie carried the rings down the aisle, a path of wildflowers, Aurora had picked herself guests wiped tears from their eyes. She placed the rings into their hands, her voice loud and clear for everyone to hear. "Now, we're really a family." Aurora's lips trembled as she looked at Callan. "I used to think love was about power, about control, about what it could gain me. But then you... and she..." She turned briefly to Ellie, who smiled up at her with unshakable faith. "You both showed me love is sacrifice. Love is fire-tested. And when it's real, it doesn't burn out." Callan's voice broke as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "I thought I'd lost everything. But in saving you, I found the two people who saved me. You're my home, Aurora. You and her." Tears blurred Aurora's vision as she slid the ring onto his hand. And when Callan kissed her slow, reverent, as if the past itself was being healed, Ellie clapped her hands and shouted. Finally, the crowd erupted in laughter, cheers, and applause. As twilight fell, Aurora and Callan danced barefoot on the grass while Ellie spun in circles around them, her giggles floating into the night. The lake shimmered like a mirror reflecting three figures who had been broken but rebuilt together. Aurora laid her head on Callan's chest, listening to the beat of his heart, a heart once tired, once fragile, now stronger, because it was no longer carrying the weight alone. Callan pressed his lips to her hair. "The fire didn't win," he whispered. Aurora closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No," she said softly. "It gave us this." Ellie ran up then, clutching her crayon, drawing the same one she had carried into Aurora's office months ago. But now she had added something new, three figures holding hands under a sky filled with stars. At the bottom, in crooked letters, she had written one word, home. Aurora knelt, wrapping her arms around her daughter. Callan bent down too, enclosing them both in his embrace. And in that moment, under strings of lights and a sky full of blessings, Aurora Vance finally understood. Home wasn't marble walls or fortunes measured in billions. Home was Callan's steady arms. Home was Ellie's laughter. Home was love. And they had found it. And so, after fire and silence, after years of loss and searching, they finally found what we all long for, a place called home. Now I want to turn this moment to you. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you tuning in from a quiet town, a busy city, or maybe somewhere in between? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to know. If this tale touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll never miss the next story of hope, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time here with me. Your presence, your thoughts, your support, they mean more than you know. Until next time, keep believing in love, in kindness, and in the power of never giving up.